What harm could Lyanna Stark's ghost do to either of us that we haven't done to each other 100 times over?
What is going on, everybody? Justin Thomas here at TopShelf Fandom. If you have not subscribed, please make sure to do so now. If you'd like to support the channel and support creativity, check out the Patreon link in the information below. As low as $3 a month from you, that would hopefully be barely noticeable, makes a huge difference for me to make a higher quality of content and make a higher quantity of content. So, okay, enough soliciting. Let's jump into this. We're talking Game of Thrones, Season 8, the final season. It's here, people. It's here. So now what do? We do what we always do. We do what we love to do. We speculate. We break down how we think things are going to pan out. In every story I'm looking at, I'm always looking at what are the themes of the story? What are the major points trying to be conveyed? And how are we going to wrap this story up in 6 episodes and convey those points? This video will be speaking about how we're going to convey the change in political landscape, meaning the societal change that does need to take place to fulfill the theme of people going against their better interests to follow people who don't have, again, their interests in mind. What is it that makes these people of Westeros just continue being impoverished so the few can be in power? So obviously something needs to change. It's called the Game of Thrones. Is a throne going to be there? How does this come about? In 6 episodes. Well, it doesn't come about in 6 episodes. And I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm saying it's absolutely going to happen. Yeah, kind of a change of pace from my usual stuff. It's already been happening. Half the legwork's already done. If I were to tell you that there's a theory that the Iron Throne is going to hold no power over Westeros whatsoever, no matter what, no matter if any of our main protagonists die, Jon Snow, Dany, Cersei, Sam, Jorah, Tyrion, Jaime, all of them. We just need a populace that is still intact to some extent of the common people. Well, that's what this is. The invasion of the White Walkers will have essentially all the same results the Plague had on the later Middle Ages, which saw the manorial economy replaced by something new. The Black Death of the mid-14th century, along with the following subsequent local outbreaks of plague, helped keep the population of Western Europe at the time in check, caused a shortage of labor, which naturally increased the labor's value. The labor services increased, thus becoming less profitable to the lords. Manors were divided up into individual private farms, each under its own tenant farmer in various areas. The power of the lords more or less vanished by the end of the Middle Ages. It's essentially where we're at in a son of ice and fire right now. The lords will die, great houses will diminish, common people will rise, and the remaining lords will have less power, resulting in difficulties to assert power over the lands, no matter who sits the throne. Even if a monarch has good intentions, just like George's sticking point with Tolkien's work is, good intentions by good men don't result in good results. It's not a guarantee. So even if they have good intentions, it will not be possible to have any meaningful effect on the lands. Now operating more as individual kingdoms within the 7, that's important, individual kingdoms within the 7 kingdoms ruled by those who live and work on the lands. And a representative of these many settlements, again, many settlements, we're not just talking about going back to separation of the kingdoms. We're talking about having so many cities and towns, civilizations, trade hubs, ports that are going to be added because of the trade and the increase of the commerce within the middle class. Yes, the creation of the middle class. If the capital wants to hope to have any power, they will need to have a representative of these many settlements that will need to be present in the capital if the capital hopes to hold on to any power. House Lannister has lost the most important allies in taking the throne. Monarchy have eliminated the power of the throne in order to secure it. 4 great houses are without a living liege lord, all due to the hostile acts of the crown forces, who do not have the forces to occupy, that's the most important part, occupy the lands they have stripped of their traditional rulers, creating a power vacuum likely to be filled by the commoner via rebellion or just simply lack of opposition. I see simply lack of opposition, resulting in the weakening of the monarchy further through this and empowering the common people, giving rise to the middle class, creating the commerce economy, something that resembles something that's capitalistic, leading to self-representation, empowering the largest population, meaning the commoners in the 7 kingdoms, no longer longer will be under the thumb of the very few. Queen Cersei destroyed the alliance with House Tyrell, the current rulers of the Reach, Dorne, and Stormlands. The Reach had provided King's Landing with much needed food and soldiers for defense. The only reason the Reach had fear of holding resources back in the past have now gone, and without this aid, it will be hard for the Lannisters to hold King's Landing without fixing what the Crown has broke. And if the White Walkers don't kill everyone, the threat from an emerging alliance between what I'm calling the Great Southern Alliance, between the Reach, Dorne, as well as the Stormlands, will starve them out without even having to draw a sword, people. They simply will have to do nothing to help. Don't count on the Riverlands doing any favors for the Crown, plus no help from the Vale, our north. All you have essentially right now is a monarch sitting in the center of the capital with a sellsword company that will potentially have to fight off the starving people their very presence has brought about. See, when the ruling houses are greatly diminished, and in most cases entirely gone, this leads to the expansion of trade, and more rural communities come into the market economy. We're dealing with a system that is solely based off of lords doing favors for other lords to just get in a higher standing or better standing with the lord above them. A huge difference when you have the common people rise. This leads to expansion of trade in more of the rural communities into the market economy, and links between the countryside and towns will grow stronger. Lords will lose a large measure of power as they're not capable of exerting the sole power over their lands. These developments stimulate the expansion of towns and merchant communities, merchant guilds, and more of a capitalistic based system of finance, such as an example being venture capitalism provided loans for businesswomen as well, instead of lords just deciding who makes what and how they sell it and who they sell it to. The recent years of bloodshed and the coming war for the Dawn will be a horrible event short term, no doubt, but eventually accelerate the spread of the markets in turn by creating a shortage of labor and thus boosting the purchasing power of both urban and rural workers. Both towns and cities will rise not only in size individually, but the number of cities will rise. The influence of both creators of goods and the merchants will become increasingly wealthy and politically powerful. Well, we need to realize what's already happening, like I said, and what the huge impact of when you go from dealing with a system that is solely based off of one lord doing another favor for this lord that's a little bit higher up than they are to hopefully gain some favor at the crown. People are going to give them goods. People are going to provide armies so they can individually have gains. And then you go into a position in which commerce is driven by the people in many ways, as they're just not going to be as likely in this transition period, especially of giving the crown anything when you're dealing with Reach, Dorne, and the Stormlands, a superpower you don't want to fuck with. And then the idea of the tenants just being able to not just work on lands, but actually buy the lands are the other option, which is sometimes frowned upon, but in the long term, most economists and most historical research has shown that it is a benefit, which is known as crop sharing. It has its pros and cons like anything else, but the point is not something that is just set. You're not a glorified serf or glorified slave. So let's step away from King's Landing for a moment, and we'll come back when it goes to the Bank of Bravos, when it comes to the Iron Bank. But let's talk about, a figure like Dany. A quote from her right here: "They can live in my world, or they can die in their old one." Well, her world, if her world is truly to break the wheel, it is going to be a world without Dany. Whether she lives or not, my prediction is she doesn't live. But the point is, it can't have Dany as the ruler. It can't have her as a monarch. It's the step aside aspect of this. If you want to break the wheel, you have to remove the spokes, and that means all the spokes. Those great houses in a singular seat of power simply can't happen. Any remaining lords must accept the loss of their influence and power, because again, this is something, people, that is happening. It's already happening. It's without a doubt something that they are facing. And yes, maybe if you just militarized the hell out of it and really fought it, you could set this back a few generations. But to attempt to stop this rise of the middle class, it won't be the best thing for the people or the realm or even them. It's a fruitless venture, and a bloody one at that. To embrace the role of maybe say a figurehead would be relatable in our times, and stand behind the decision to let people represent themselves and benefit off their work and sacrifice. Another aspect is getting out of the Dark Ages. This is one of my big issues with how this story will end. We can't have this problem of the White Walkers, which seems to be a problem that derives completely from magic in the sense of how they were created, but why they were created is not magic. They were created because the first men and the children of the Forest were at war, and the children of the Forest decided to essentially create nukes. So we are dealing with a situation that I'm saying, you gotta get out of the Dark Ages. Magic can't solve this issue. There's been no substantial technological advancements in Westeros for over 3 generations, mostly due to the fact that people are waiting on prophets and dragons to either cause their rise to power or to solve problems, focusing on the better ways to utilize resources available to actually sustain these long winters through creating advanced methods of grain storage and improving infrastructure to help the travel of just not goods but ideas spread widely across the continent in need of this bicultural influence. And we'll get into the immigration here in a minute. Like I said, this is somewhat of a brief explanation of what I'm going through with the change of Westeros, but I do have a plan out if George sticks to historically how these things go. Educate the masses is the next one. Common folk have fewer options than the nobles when it comes to education. Some commoners can luck out and receive training from a maester, or even to become a maester. It is far more likely that the only real education an average commoner receives at this point is either from a figure close to them, teaching them the family trade, or they undergo apprenticeship. However, though, an apprenticeship in Game of Thrones is noted to cost a fair amount of money. Gendry is only able to remain an apprentice as a smith in King's Landing because of the anonymous lord that pays the fees. In medieval England, as a source for this, as a example of this in our real world, England, a society that roughly parallels the world of Game of Thrones, it was actually illegal for the sons of peasants to be educated. The reason for this, most likely, in my opinion, for sure, was the fear from the feudal lords that any educated individual might start to question the way things are done. Once lords lose complete power, commoners will need to read and write and have an understanding of complex topics, like finance and science, that the nobles would usually only have access to. And the good thing about this, too, is it's not just an increase in the people that are educated, but it's increase in the people that educate. It's not such a, boys' club. The doors aren't closed to the ivory tower of the maesters. If you're going to educate the masses, which is going to be necessary when the masses are finally the people that are just not the ones that make the few rich, the masses have the overall influence, so you're going to need to educate them. So that means you're going to need more educators as well. Use the winter for not only the furtherment of education. Like I said, this is a great time for people that are in areas where they can't farm at the time, and we'll get into more deeply in the second video about how there are processes, and these all come from examples of what happened historically in our own world, and that are all in line with the bits and pieces of the real world that George utilizes. I'm not reaching or using selective research whatsoever for this. This is, to a T what happens in our world. So George has followed the path so far as the warfare has gone with what happens in our world. So the societal change, I don't really see how he's going to be driving from anywhere or deriving this information from anywhere else. So to educate the masses, we can utilize things like the long night in long winters, since we have this irregularity in our actual seasons. It's not guaranteed to have spring, summer, autumn, winter. That's just not how it works there. So the White Walker invasion should hypothetically jumpstart a reform in education as well as a standing army, meaning forming a standing army, which can be drawn from kingdoms which are not strong agriculturally. With the influence of the new influx of the wildling immigrants, they can diversify the skill set of the people of Westeros who don't think of the winter time as a time to thrive. They merely aim to survive it. There's no reason why the areas that are not agriculturally rich cannot produce skilled workers to establish and protect trade, as well as capitalize on a large amount of timber that can be chopped and sent down the waterways that can be forged out from the north to go all the way through the south. And urbanization will create a larger number of hubs of trade, which means widespread improvements in the infrastructure other than building bridges and whatnot to further their travel for their civil wars. You're going to look to get better bridges, more roadways to increase actual canals, rivers, dredge out bays for ports, cultivating of the land to better the economy and better the culture. In the books, we see a clear example of the timber in the north with the wildlings. When the Iron Bank of Bravos, which we're about to cap this off with, what I believe their true beliefs are, and I think there's evidence for it. And I try to stick away from the books when it's talking about the show, but I do believe that they've showed this with their interaction with Stannis in the show, not as prominently, but in the books we have to figure that they are visiting the Wall to offer a loan for the wildlings to help them with their timber business. This shows a humanist approach. I think that they're willing to go all that distance to go visit and invest in the timber. This shows that they actually want what's best for the realm.
If you're an aspiring shopkeeper, you come to us to buy your shop. Whatever you need in this world, we are the conduit. Even a throne can be yours if you're an aspiring king, or stay yours if you're a sitting one. Just ask House Lannister of Westeros.
The monarch needs a majority of the population to be impoverished in order to stay in power. So do the great houses, so do the vassal lords, the liege lords. Now, when we look at the Reach and we look at Dorne and we look at Stormlands, all without lords, we have to understand that they're not going to go and dive into the ancestry, and we're not pulling out the lineage and seeing who would be next in the succession. Not being dismissive of that, I actually love that stuff, and I'm really excited to do it once the books come out, but they're not going to do that in the show. They made it clear that when Dorne was just taken care of, that it was simply Dorne consisted of the Martells, Arya Hota, and the Sand Snakes. Nobody else. Once they were gone, they were gone. The Reach is probably the most in-depth you're going to get because the Tyrells were taken care of, and then you had the Tarleys taken care of. So don't expect Yornwoods to come up. Don't expect Danes to come up. Don't expect Hightowers to even come up. And these are major houses, I know. You're preaching to the choir, but to achieve the greater good, there's going to be a large amount of sacrifice, but both common and noble will die. That has always been a catalyst in the history of any type of power structure being dramatically altered, especially the feudalistic system. We have the seats of power that are very stable right now, a bi-curious situation, but that's what's interesting about this, is we don't need them to survive, to make this work. The rapid decline of the power of the few, the nobles, is just enough right there to put them in a situation where they just can't exert the power that the crown and the throne are supposed to be able to do. Let's look at how the Lannisters were holding on to power. That was through their gold, of course, which is dried up, loaning money to the monarch, wanting them to default on their loan so they could be paid back in a different currency. The currency meaning being in better standing with the monarch. That's extortion, essentially. So if that's your process and then you put one of your own on the throne, becomes a huge problem. You can't, first off, loan money that you don't have and gain any sort of favor from it. You can't loan yourself that money, not pay it back, and then try to use that for the betterment of your political standing. So the whole process in which Cersei is used to just operating is just so short-sighted that it's not going to serve her. And that leads us to the Iron Bank and her views on the Iron Bank and how she thinks they're going to be all for her. And assumingly because Dany hurt slave trade in Essos, well, let's play a little video about who the Iron Bank are, and they are not going to just stay away from Dany because of the slave trade. Also, for being so intelligent and so dangerous, why are they backing somebody that's so clearly in a very, very poor situation? And also, they're backing somebody that is just willing to be king of the ashes. The Iron Bank will not make any money when the Long Night is carried out to the extent that I don't see it being carried out in, but we have to put ourselves in the story and think that they don't think it's impossible that this army of dead people actually do conquer the world, and the last Long Night did affect Essos heavily as well. So it's very odd that we can think they're sincerely backing her. It's not long-term thinking. That's Cersei thinking right there. So in the second video, we will be more talking about what the Iron Bank's true intentions are, or at least what I think they are. I will give you a brief layout, what I think is going to happen in King's Landing. I think Cersei is truly screwed. I do not think that the destruction that we see in King's Landing in Dany's vision in the House of the Undying comes from any Stark forces. The Targaryen forces are the others. I believe it comes from the Golden Company, and I believe the Golden Company is ordered to do it by Cersei. I believe if Cersei can't have the throne for herself, she will, in fact, destroy the throne so nobody else can get it. I do think that the Iron Bank giving Jon the loan to get the wildlings, I know it's not specifically for timber, as I said, but it is for getting the wildlings through the winter, and it is a showcasing of them looking at the bigger threat. I don't think they are going to back Cersei for any reason. They have no reason to have any issue with her they can't get over. They've shown interest in the realm with the Faceless Men, and they seem to be not always following people that are owing them money. I also want to address the idea that, yes, I'm highly pushing that urbanization needs to happen with the military numbers. Inconsistent with a continent that is not urbanized, George has come out in interviews and said that he has purposely been inconsistent with the military numbers to more so have a dialogue in a narrative on how inconsistent the actual numbers were throughout history and the numbers that we have to this day. I have done extensive research into this project, and I have taken everything into account, especially the aspect of urbanization and when in our history it tends to flourish and what causes it, what are the effects of it, and so forth. You know, George's army numbers, and especially in the way in which the army is able to rapidly assemble forces, especially in scarcely populated regions, is definitely in conflict with that thesis. It's either they're botched subconsciously or consciously, or all urbanized to the point of where you'd be able to raise troops in the way they did. So my point is, when presenting information for this, I want to present the other side, and I do have the numbers on the screen right now. So it's up to you if you want to take the numbers, go all over the place, and I have the percentages up there for you. So it is basically the idea that I'm pretty sure George wants to tell us that the Westeros needs to improve its infrastructure, and it definitely needs to make changes in its rule, and that he needed the war to happen, so he definitely took way more liberties with that. Another after effect of King's Landing, which we'll get into in the second video, is the displacement of the 2 million are the 500,000, whoever you want to go by, are the 1 million from the season before season 7. The number of immigrants and people that live in King's Landing, if they are displaced, where they will go. Also dealing with the Unsullied and Dothraki, if they will stay there, and so forth. Leaning more towards my thesis that it does need to have an influx of immigration and an influx of bicultural ideas and influences from the East in order to improve their grain storage and their technology, farming methods, and so forth. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Make sure to subscribe and be on the lookout for episode 2. And I'll also be doing a video on narrative theory and how I use narrative theory and story theory to break down the actual series that we love so much. A better way to craft theories. Thank you guys.
If you're an aspiring merchant, you come to us to buy ships and goods. If you're an aspiring shopkeeper, you come to us to buy your shop. Whatever you